Hello, everyone. I am Corey Andrew Powell, and in today's episode of Motivational Mondays, we are thrilled to introduce a remarkable individual whose dedication to improving the lives of patients and caregivers is truly inspiring. So, joining us today is Pam Cusick, a seasoned research professional with over 30 years of experience in study design, implementation, and analysis. Now, Pam's journey is deeply rooted in her background of public health, communications, and research, where her passion for patient advocacy shines through in all that she does. So, Pam, welcome to Motivational Mondays.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. We're happy you're here. And as I mentioned to you a little before we started recording here, that the caregiver thing for me is, I think, something that a lot of people may go through as they watch their parents get older, and even like a double dynamic of watching if your parent is a caregiver. So you're watching your parent get older while they're taking care of a parent getting older who are your grandparents. I mean, it's really pervasive in our society. So what I want to just first tell you is that I love that you're giving the caregivers a voice because I really feel, and correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like that segment of healthcare is not necessarily at the forefront very often to hear from those who are in those positions. Expand on that. What do you think?
Sure. So I think sometimes the caregiver knows more than the patient does. They are dealing with, ordering medication, setting up appointments, dealing with the day to day if the patient can't really manage things on their own. So it becomes they're the surrogate for the patient. So getting their input into research, into the design of products and services is really essential because they have that information that the patient often doesn't maybe even see or know that part of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and very often too, it's interesting around when I watched my mother, for example, be a caregiver for two people at once. And she did it like around the clock. And I would say, Mom, like, even like a professional caregiver gets like a weekend. Like the day ends at like
Right,
after 8 hour shift, right? They get to go home.
right.
But for family who's caregiving now, I think people don't also realize that, in many cases, it is just literally a round the clock thing. So I just love that you're, giving a voice to that. Um,
It's
yeah.
it's exhausting. It's
Hmm.
exhausting. It is round the clock. And I think that's the thing that, when you're paying for a caregiving service, they come in at a certain time and they leave. And with, a parent, like my dad was the caregiver for my mom, and it was 10 or more years of around the
Mm,
clock kind of planning and he loved my mom and wanted to take care of her, but it's a lot on a person. And I think when you're in it, you don't always see the toll it's taking on you and the exhaustion and just the mental difficulty of seeing your loved one in a situation like that and trying
mhm.
to care for them while still doing whatever else you're doing around your home. It's a lot. And I don't think that people see that and or get the support for it that they really need.
Yeah, and many don't know where to even go. I mean, I looked at a lot of online information. It's very confusing. You don't know where to turn. I got lucky where there was a lovely woman who began to follow the podcast, and she reached out to me on
Mhm.
LinkedIn. Her name is Dr. Hickman, and she had written a book about her own experience as a caregiver.
Wow.
And it was
Mhm.
interesting because, there are these things that we don't think about with, when it comes to a health proxy or just all
Mhm.
these things that as an aging society that we have to definitely, I encourage everyone, and even if you think you're too young to know these things, just realize we're all going to get older eventually. So the earlier you put those ducks in a row, the better off
Right,
you're going to
for
be.
sure.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you, so that's one aspect, of course, of the work you do, but I am curious to know, just in general, because your work is as a patient advocate, and I guess more of in the rare disease area. So I'm just curious for you personally, with that as a current career, what was a pivotal moment for you that led you to this path?
So, in our advocacy is really around helping patients share their voices. So through research. So my path is really as a public health researcher, and then I got into pharmaceutical research around patients and getting information to them that was in a format they understood and something that spoke to them and something that helped them to make decisions. And that led me to, down the line to this organization where really what we are is a matchmaker. So we go to events, we'll go to the National Hemophilia Foundation Conference or National Sickle Cell Conference, meet patients, meet their caregivers, explain what type of research they could be involved in. And that's everything from surveys and focus groups and interviews all the way through clinical research. And they join our community. They never have to participate in anything. They just, if they join, we'll invite them to participate in studies. But if they do, they earn $120 an hour, except for clinical research where you're not paid for your time. But
Mhm.
it's really a wonderful way for them to share their journey and their experience with a seasoned researcher who understands their disease, understands what they're going through, and then can share that with companies developing products and services.
Mhm.
So our advocacy, if in that using that term, is really kind of making sure that we find all those opportunities for patients to and caregivers to share their experience and to share what they have learned through their diagnosis or through being a caregiver to help companies to develop those products and services to make life a little better for them.
Mm. That's wonderful. And of course, you have your graphic there behind you on the screen, but I should note that the company is called Rare Patient Voice again, and that is the organization that does this,
Right.
that you are the founder of the organization. And okay,
No. My colleague Wes Michael founded the company in
okay,
2013,
okay.
and I came on board a little more than 7 years ago. So he
Mm,
and I had worked in an organization 25 or so years ago that was a pharmaceutical market research company. And we worked in the patient kind of consumer area where
yeah.
there was kind of a growth in that industry and hearing the patient's voice and that patient centricity was needed. And so we worked together there. And during that time, kind of he came up with the idea that, there was really no organization that was specifically recruiting patients for research. And we would have, very complicated, patient recruiting or projects that we were working on. And it was hard to find the patient. So
Mm.
eventually it became the right time. And he started the organization. And I said, hey, let me know when you need somebody. And so he eventually did. And now we're back working together.
Yeah, that's super. And I love from the leadership standpoint, one of the things that we always talk about here at the NSLS to young college students or even non-traditional students or professionals out in the working world is that very often the greatest opportunities are where you find there is an opportunity, right? There's something that's not being serviced, or there's some area or a demographic that's not provided with a
Right.
need. And so I know there's a part of your work also deals with underrepresented communities. So I am wondering, like, do you find that in that particular segment of the business, there's even less or fewer opportunities for people in underrepresented communities to be heard? So there's like a disparity, or is it equal that no one's listening to anybody, and so you had to kind of help everybody across the board, or is it a little bit of both? I don't know.
Uh, well, it kind of depends. So yeah, we need to help everybody be able to share their voice and be heard. And more organizations are looking to do that. So that's a positive. In terms of underrepresented communities, there are certainly different feelings about research in specific communities. There's a bit of distrust among some groups. The interesting thing, we have a lot of women who are great at responding. Men are not as great at responding to research requests. I don't know if
Hmm.
they sign up, but they're not as excited to participate or don't really want to, get to the touchy feely of their why and all that other stuff. I don't
Yeah.
know, but I don't really have an answer for that. But they're not
Right.
as the response rate among men is not as great as it is among women, for
Hmm.
research. Um, but we do endeavor to find people who are in underrepresented communities, and that's becoming a bigger ask. When clients come to us, they will be looking for, specific subgroups of people within, you know, whatever the disease area is. Pick one, hemophilia, and they want to make sure that there are different genders represented, different ethnicities represented, And so we make, an effort to identify those people who are already in our community. We have 100, I don't think I said this, 145,000 patients and caregivers who've signed
Wow.
up with us
Mm,
across 1,500 conditions. So we do have, a fairly good diversity. One of the areas that is not as well represented in research is the disability community.
mm,
So, ensuring that you include people with mobility issues, hearing loss, vision loss, chronic pain, all of these things, depending on the product or service you're creating, impact people in a different way. And so getting the voice of those um, different groups is also important. So
mm.
there are a lot of different ways to kind of, I guess, parse the information and who you're trying to bring in, but
Yeah.
you have to be very intentional about it. Because if
Yeah.
you just sort of throw out an invitation, you'll get the people who respond most. So, some women and this is our experience,
Right, right.
but you might not find an older population or
Hmm.
a younger you know what I mean? It depends what you're looking
Right.
for. So you have to make the effort to look for those patients and intentionally invite them in to
Hmm.
be part of the research. And I think that's becoming more of a something that we're asked for more often now, because there is a light being shown on DEI and making sure that we are, when we present research results or our clients do, that it has included different groups and different points of view.
I'm really happy you brought up the DEI conversation because obviously right now that's a big political hot point. And I
Mhm.
mean, like within the last 24 to 48 hours, there's been headlines about DE&I initiatives being completely dismantled across various organizations or universities. And I'm glad you brought up DE&I in your line of work because people are often forgetting that we're not talking about just race and ethnicity.
Mhm.
DEI is inclusivity of people with disabilities, physical challenges and body limitations.
Mhm.
And so to just broadly get rid of DEI I mean, I said I'm not going to get political, but uh, it's completely negligent, though. It really is because it's not a broad stroke. It's a lot of things under that umbrella. So that was a little bit of a disconcerting thing to see that, with the stroke of a pen, just whoosh, no more DE and I. I'm like, well, wait, there's a whole lot of stuff under that umbrella.
It's interesting because while that is happening in some sectors, we're seeing an increase in the interest. And I just had two calls today, prior to our call, that were focused on making sure that there is more inclusivity in clinical trials.
Okay.
So, there are efforts underway where they may be ending in some areas. It's really becoming a bigger concern where we see our clients making an effort to identify and invite patients who are from different races, different socioeconomic groups, disability groups, making sure that those voices are included. Because when you look at a product that you're trying to bring to market, it's not just one subgroup that's going to purchase it. You
Mm,
want to, make sure your messaging appeals to people across a variety of groups, whether that be ethnicities, whether it be a disability. Every people have a different way of interpreting things, and you want to make sure you're addressing that in a way that you are going to reach the broadest number of people. You're going to communicate effectively with them and invite them to use your product, test your product, buy your product, whatever it is.
hmm
Um, but not including those voices in the early development and in the marketing of those things, you lose a whole sector. I mean,
mm,
with disabilities, as an example, 25% of the world's population has some sort of a disability.
mm,
That's 25% of people who could, you know, use your product, buy your
mm.
product, talk to their doctor about their whatever it is.
Right.
So it's a big number. And so when we exclude those people from anything, whether it be education, as you were mentioning, or research in a broad sense, you're losing that opportunity to communicate with a larger group.
Yeah. And it would be like really anti-business if you're trying to sell something. I mean, it doesn't even make sense. It's like, I know we'll create this great product and only allow like 10% of the population to even use it. I
10%
mean,
of the
that would,
people wants to buy it, right?
right, that would make zero
Exactly.
sense. Yeah. Um,
Exactly.
also with that point being made too, one of the things that I became conscious of, maybe the second year I was doing the show, and I guess I'm going on like maybe maybe 3 years now of doing the show, but it became more important for me as well to bring voices on. We have people who had physical challenges or disabilities, and
Hmm.
so one of my favorite guests is a young woman named Chelsea Bear, and Chelsea she was born with cerebral palsy, and she created this whole platform on Instagram, sort of like accidentally, just kind of showing her day to day.
Hmm.
I go get Starbucks like you. It may look a little different. I run, but it may look a little different. And if your kid, if
Right,
you're,
right.
yeah, she tries to normalize what, life is for her. She's like, if your child looks at me and says, Mommy, she walks funny, don't pull your kid away like I'm a disease. Just explain,
Hmm.
talk to me. And so her numbers rose like astronomically on Instagram. So she's this really great advocate for just allowing people to understand that we all have these different possibilities. But I brought her up to say, you mentioned that 25% of the population. She said something so profound I didn't really think of. She goes, Corey, I want you to also know that whether it be sickness or some other sort of, maybe God forbid, an accident or just natural aging, like at some point, nearly everybody on the planet at some point in their lives will be quote unquote disabled through some
Hmm.
situation. So I think, and sort of normalizing the fact that this is a typical possible body condition for humanity, it sort of demystifies it, makes it not so scary, and those
Hmm.
efforts are so, so important. So I definitely commend you on that. And I'm glad you're saying that in that sector of the business, there's still a need and a
Hmm.
request for it.
Right.
Yeah, that's really super. So let me ask you as well, when it comes to the sense of community, or I guess if there's a correlation between community and a connection between like empowering patients to share their own experiences for the sake of doing it, not just to have bearing their grievance, but is it empowering to say to them, listen, you're being a part of a bigger thing that is going to help people? Is that sort of what is a bigger driver and people wanting to share, you think?
It's really very cool. So I think I mentioned we go out to events. We'll go to these different conferences where we meet patients and caregivers. We set up our booth, and people will come up and say, "Oh, what do you do?" And we'll explain. And a lot of times people will say, like, "Well, why would anyone want to hear from me about my disease?"
Mm,
And then I'll say, "Well, you're the expert. You live with this every day. You know more than in some cases your doctor might know. You're 24/7 with this condition." And they get a little proud. And, they're like, "Oh, yeah, I am the expert." And, then when they go and they talk to a moderator, someone who's doing an interview, a focus group, and that person is, you know, kind of eh, asking them about, details about their journey and what they experience every day, it's very like therapeutic and motivating. And
mm,
there was one woman who we worked with for some time, and she had participated in a number of different studies, but when she and I didn't realize this, she was interviewed a publication that we work with called Rare Revolution magazine. They did an interview with me, and then they wanted to talk to a patient who had participated, so they did an interview separately with her. I didn't know what she was going to say, and what she said was that before she started doing research, she really didn't, like, I guess, feel like she was an expert in I guess, in her disease. And she, by doing this and sharing her story and being part of the research community, she like found her voice. And
mm,
then she, started working in advocacy and some other things. And it was really gratifying to hear that, doing this one thing, we're a matchmaker, right? We connect patients with these opportunities. I'm not doing the research myself, but by being part of our community, it helped her to find her voice in a place, which
mm.
I thought was very cool. And I think
Yeah.
that story is probably a lot more common because when you have a medical condition that you're living with, you might not want to talk about it all the time with your family. Like they
Hmm.
already heard your story, they know it. You don't want to burden them in some cases or worry them. But then you get to talk to this moderator or researcher who is asking you all these questions, and it's like a waterfall of
Mm,
information comes out
yeah.
that you've been holding inside because you don't want to freak people out. You don't want to
Right,
upset
right.
them, or and so it is. I think it is self-affirming and therapeutic and motivating for people to be able to share their story and know that their story can make things better for other people.
Mm,
Maybe, other people coming after them. If it's a product, that someone is developing. Like we have one of our colleagues who he said he was doing usability work with a cane. And he said he's absolutely sure that his input helped them to add this other foot to the cane and make it much better.
yeah,
I'm sure
yeah.
that's true,
Hmm.
and that's a really empowering moment to know that you made a difference. Seeing an ad on TV that you might have worked on kind of on the formative information. You're like, wait, I know that. I've seen that before. I was in that study. It's pretty
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, no, that is wonderful. And I love that it also, another thing we talk about just in a leadership conversation is this idea of things that are in life. Well, I can't take this quote, but I interviewed an amazing woman named Jennifer Kaufman, who was one of the marathon runners in the Boston bombing years ago. And she has this remarkable story about how it transformed her and how it became a positive that changed the trajectory of her life in a very positive way, where she's an award-winning filmmaker today, which was not even her career beforehand,
It
but
wasn't her
led her.
thing.
Yeah, it wasn't her thing. She's like in finance, but a documentary about her experience led to awards and Oscar nomination. It was just interesting. So she recalibrated and rethought her sentiments about the experience. And her comment was, in life, things that you think are happening to you are sometimes happening for you. And just as you were sharing that, it made me think about how a person with disabilities like you said, they're longing to sort of share the experience. They're now empowered to kind of own it, lean into it. And it's a superpower now that only a few people can probably
Yep.
talk about, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Like recalibrating your thinking. It's really a powerful thing. And so I guess when you talk about that, you're at that point you're utilizing, I guess, patient input as well, like market research. And I think that's essential for companies as well. So when you work, I mean, do you work with companies specifically that say to you that we are trying to um, initiate DI programs, and so they want to bring people in as employees or speakers, or to what level does that work in your business?
So in a couple different ways. So the majority of the people who come to us looking for um, that kind of work are coming for research purposes. So they want to make sure that there's diversity in their research. But we do
Hmm.
also have companies, again, someone that I spoke with today who wants to create a kind of a what would you call it? Expert panel
Mm,
who can talk about inclusivity in clinical trials and what their experiences have been. So there are different groups who want to talk to people either as speakers in some cases. Sometimes we'll have clients who want to have someone come talk to their business so that they can hear from a real patient. But most of the requests that we get are to include diverse people in general in research opportunities.
hmm. Going back a little bit to what you said, we were speaking about how certain demographics of the population may not be so open to having discussions about things. And, men specifically, which is not shocking that men would be more guarded. I had
Mhm.
a young black doctor on a woman. She's this fabulous young woman who has this whole platform called Faces of Medicine, where she talks to other black female doctors and across the country, and they share their experiences. And one of the things we talked about was how a lot of marginalized groups, ethnic groups in particular, are less likely to talk about their problems, especially if it is mental wellness. That's just, traditionally, black folks don't talk about that. That's kind of like what, you know, as you said, we
Uh-huh.
don't talk about it. And but when they see other people that look like them in the profession, um, Black doctors then going to the Black community and saying, baby, sit down, what's going on? Talk to me. It's different. It potentially can yield
Mhm.
results. So do you find that maybe in your line of work too, have you seen where there might be more of a likelihood or maybe the reason why you might not get some of that participation is because maybe those groups are not seeing themselves represented in maybe the people who are trying to recruit them? Or, I mean, I'm just asking, like, in general, if you think that might be something that could improve upon your
That
work.
that could be the case. I know in some of the, I'm speaking more to the qualitative research. So when you're doing face to face connecting with someone, I think people, companies try to make an effort to um, you know, match with, women talking to women or men talking
Yeah.
to men
Yeah.
or, African American moderator talking to, I don't think that that doesn't always happen, but I think, the level of awareness and cultural sensitivity is there in the
Hmm.
qualitative space, trying to make sure that it is, things are culturally appropriate and you're talking to people in a space that they feel comfortable in and talking to them about things that, making them feel comfortable so they'll want to share with you. And
Hmm.
I think that's part of the qualitative researchers community, trying to make sure that, you are welcoming to a larger population so that you don't want to exclude anybody. And I think
Yeah.
that probably, some of the things, where you're mentioning like mental health and, that is probably an area that's harder to recruit in some ways
Yeah.
because, people don't want to admit they have a problem or they're anxious or depressed or have bipolar disorder or what have you.
Hmm.
But when they're invited in a specific way, so, for example, when we invite people to participate in research, it's very we send them an email. It has just the information that they what kind of condition it is, how long the study experience is, what the compensation is. It allows them the time and space to sit back and make a decision about it themselves. They don't have to feel like someone's calling them on the phone. They have to do it on the spot and be, worried and oh no, I'm gonna commit to something I don't want to do. They can literally sit with it and think about it. They can, you know, do a little research. They can go to our website and kind of feel comfort in making a decision about whether they want to be, part of a study. And I think that helps. At least I think it helps for us because
Right.
we have become a trusted partner to our patients. So
Mm.
when they get an email from us and they see what the requirements are, they can then make a decision. And we don't hound them if they don't participate. They don't participate. That's
Right.
completely up to them. We
Yeah.
want them to feel comfortable. So if it is something like a subject they're not comfortable talking about, they just move on to their next email.
Mm.
And so we're trying to make it a more open and accepting experience. I think the one thing that I do know, or from being in research my whole career, is not everyone understands what research is or how they could be involved. So,
Mm.
that going back to what I said about people coming up to our booth and saying, "Well, why would anyone want to hear from me?"
Right.
Not
Right.
everyone knows,
They don't
that
realize
they
it.
can, right, that, they have a story to tell and that there are people who want to hear it. And
Hmm.
so being a part of a community where they could be connected with research is really important because if they don't share their voice, then that's a whole area, a whole group that's left out,
Mm.
right? So
Yeah.
it is a good thing to do to participate in research. And I mean, clinical research is a whole different thing. There's a lot of inclusion and exclusion criteria, and whether you've how long you've been diagnosed. There are all sorts of things, depends on the
Hmm.
trial. But for a lot of market research studies, you're looking for someone who's been diagnosed with this condition for
Right.
this
Right.
long and tell me your story. And that's
Hmm.
a pretty powerful thing. And by doing that, that show is, giving the opportunity for people like you to be included in the design and development of something, which is good. Sure.
This has been one of my favorite conversations, I must say. I do a lot of these
Oh,
conversations, obviously. But yeah, this has been great. And as I mentioned, I have a personal sort of connection as
Mhm.
I'm at an age where I'm watching family, sort of have to get through some health things. And so it's
Right.
fascinating. And I'm very happy that
Yeah.
you're doing the work you do. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, thank you
Yes.
so much for inviting me to be on, and I really enjoyed our conversation.
It's my pleasure, Pam Cusick, and we will give everyone the information to reach out to your organization. And thank you again for being here today on Motivational Mondays.
Thank you.